Welcome on Democracy with FP Wellman. I am FP Wellman, Fred Wellman, your host of the show, right back in the studio again. We took another little break for reasons. I'm sure you'll find out soon. But it's great to be back in the studio with Matt in the back there, keeping me straight. It's actually a very lovely kind of gray day here in St. Louis. But we're ready to talk about a really cool thing. And that cool thing this week, I may not have touched a lot of your lives. It may not have really impacted you. A lot of people probably didn't even know what happened. But this weekend was the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. With a long war like that, not everybody was there for that day. I was. I invaded Iraq twice. I was with the 101st Airborne. So I wanted to do a different kind of show today. And I told you when we talked about the show, we would talk about all the aspects of democracy. And one of those is the experience of our soldiers and our fellow Americans going off to war and the impact on their families. So I got a really cool guest to talk about that. So let's not waste any time. Let's get on with the show. Welcome. Once again, as I mentioned right before the music, I am Fred Wellman, your host of On Amongst the FP Wellman, coming to you on all your favorite channels from Apple, Spotify, Google, Buzzsprout. Where else, Matt? Jesus Christ. YouTube. We're everywhere, man. We're like a virus. Soon on Substack, by the way. Big news coming on that. Anyways, it's a lot going on right now. Hey, look, DC's as crazy as always. We're all on indictment watch. Mr. Trump, is saying he's going to get arrested. Everyone wants to break law. It's great stuff. Everybody's doing that. Look, I'm not going to we could all dive on that grenade. I've dove enough grenades on that. I actually just want to take a step back, as I mentioned previously, and talk about something that impacted my life and many of the people I work with and their lives and their families and our nation as a whole and the soul of our nation. And that, of course, is the beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 20 years ago. I, of course, was there at the 101st Airborne. As I thought about guests, I wanted to get somebody who had a really unique perspective. And I talked to some of my former generals or, bosses and stuff. But late yesterday, thank God, like I usually do, I called up Leo Shane and I said, hey, I know you're working for a living, but can you come on my show tomorrow? And God bless him, he did. So who is Leo Shane? Well, Leo Shane is the deputy editor of Military Times in Washington, D.C. He covers Congress, Veterans Affairs, the White House for the Military Times family of newspaper. Now, here's where it gets interesting. He's covered D.C. since 2004, focusing on military personnel and veterans policies. His work has earned numerous honors, and I want to list those because it matters, including a 2009 Polk Award, 2010 National Headliner Award, the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans America Leadership and Journalism Award, which I was really proud to be there for the actual ceremony, Leo. And, of course, the really prestigious the VFW Vera Foreign Wars News Media Award, which he got at the VFW convention. I've known him for, I think, over 12 years now, Leo. So, Leo, thanks, man. I call you a friend. Welcome to the show. Thanks for taking time.
Look, if we were friends, you wouldn't start off by saying how old I am. I mean, you don't need to bring in the years of when I started and make it seem like I've been here for too long. So
yeah, you're old as shit.
Great for
what the fuck's up with that? I mean, same job for 20 years. It's fucked up.
It's been great. I get that question a lot. I get a lot of like, why are you still doing the same thing? And like, honestly, not a lot of people cover veterans issues, and it's been a pleasure for me. It's been I've been able to be on stories that are really important to America, really important to the veterans community that a lot of people overlook. So, I consider myself pretty fortunate to have found two different organizations that have paid me despite my poor writing skills and my poor interviewing skills. But I've been doing this. I was with Stars and Stripes for 9 years, been with Military Times for 9 years now. Wow. And it's great. It's given me a unique perspective on a lot of this.
Well, that's it, and you're, and not to blow smoke up your ass, but that's what we do in the show is like,
I'm happy to take it.
Yeah, take it. Bendo, you're considered, and this is not you saying this. This is all my friends and people who know you. You're the dean of the Veteran Press Corps. You're the guy who's been there for so long. When we met the first time, I'd followed you for years, and then when I started my firm, Scout Comms, and got hired by this little company, a little hardware firm called Home Depot in 2011. I remember we attended the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans annual conference in D.C. And I just gotten, it was actually only been on the job for like 3 months with Home Depot, and they sponsored it that year. It was 2011, May of 2011. And I remember going to this conference, and here's all the veterans homeless organizations in America, basically, right? The board of NCHV was all these Vietnam veterans who were getting up in their 70s and 80s who had founded this thing just for their brothers and sisters, which is something I want to arc back to later on that topic. And I'm like, where's the media? And we discovered at that point that our friends were hardworking people who were just down the trenches and hadn't thought about the fact that, hey, we're in DC and there's media. And God bless you. I remember calling you up. You're like, you don't know me for shit. I'm here with the Home Depot Foundation. They've just launched a $30 million over 3-year program to help veterans. You got 5 minutes, and God bless you. You ran over from the press club, and Stars and Stripes had you at the National Press Club, and thus began a long and painful relationship for you.
For the next 5-6 years, you called me every week with another story. So
no, it's actually 9. 9.
Well, no, you had other people calling me after the first few years. So,
I do. That's true. I did have people. I had people at one point. I was actually in no shit initially. I mean, and you kind of answered it right, but I do start off with, how did you get here? How did you end up focusing on the military and the veterans? You came out, I think, Delaware, where you went to journalism, I think, and I think you stopped in Pennsylvania, you stopped in Illinois, and then you ended up in D.C. eventually. What brought you to this moment?
It was a big accident on my part. I never intended to cover military and veterans issues. I don't have a lot of military background in my family. My father-in-law served in the Navy, didn't talk about it much before he passed away. Both my grandfathers served in World War II, but same thing, couple stories here and there. So I never really felt any deep connection to the military or the veterans community. I was just looking for, what are good stories. So when we moved to D.C., a position open at Stars and Stripes, talk about military personnel issues. At the time, it was no conversation about Veterans Affairs. This is 2004, and it was like we talk about the troops, talk about DoD. We don't talk about VA though. That's a whole nother issue, and that's one of the giant things that's changed over the years. And I still complain that VA is undercovered, that veterans should be more covered. There should be a veterans reporter at every major paper because this is a key part of the community now. The number of young veterans, number of old veterans, just how it makes an effect. There's still not much coverage though, but the coverage now is leaps and bounds above what it was back in 2004, 2005, because there just was nothing. It was still Veterans Affairs was for old guys who served in Vietnam, and we talked about Agent Orange presumptives, and we talked about some backlog issues, and maybe talked about funding some VA hospitals here and there, and that was it. It was all in a little committee that nobody talked about. The VA budget was about $50 billion, I think, in 2002. It's a little bit before me, but VA budget this year is $325 billion. I mean, that's how much it's grown. And yet, $325 billion, second largest single agency. It's bigger than any of the individual military services budgets. But there's still about a dozen of us that really are keeping any tabs on it, keeping track of it, as opposed to the DoD, which has a couple hundred
press corps.
A full press corps, full press office, and everything. So, it's been a fascinating ride. It's been fascinating to see just how much has changed, and yet I'm still left with this impression that we don't talk about veterans enough. Still, we don't talk about these issues enough. We don't acknowledge just how much the reintegration, the lingering problems from the military, the successes, and we'll get into all that. But there's just not the same level of conversation that we have about the local school district and what they're doing and what this community group's doing. Nobody's in talking to the local VFW saying, hey, what are you doing beyond Veterans Day, beyond Memorial Day? What are the things that you're doing during the year?
Well, it's also gotten very rah-rah, right? I think, and you came into that. I think 2004, as you came into this world, I was just coming back. I got back from my first tour in Iraq in, I want to say April of 2004. That's when I met President Bush, at March of 2004. Was it March or April? Doesn't remember. He came to visit, Fort Campbell. I'd already been picked up to be a public affairs officer for the division at the time, the 101st Airborne. And you're right, it was a very different world. We got local coverage, but it was also very kind of the rah-rah, we love the troops and, homecomings. And, there wasn't really an open discussion about, what we faced or of course, also, there wasn't really the realization we're going to face anything different at that point. We had a very successful and smooth ride through Baghdad and up into Mosul, and then things didn't cut too haywire till right about the time. I mean, that's the interesting thing about your timeline, Leo, is you joined as things turned, right? And then late 2004 is when...
Well, it's not my fault.
Yeah, that's a weird coincidence, isn't it? And look, here you are, same career.
No, look, you're right. That was an interesting time there because we were starting to see some of that initial, we're back in the troops are supporting all this wear off and some of the public, and it's also, it's Iraq. It's now Iraq is taking precedence over Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a popular but forgotten war, and Iraq was the unpopular one, right? But the interesting thing from my perspective was seeing how the policy was finally separated from the personnel. So, people weren't attacking the troops. People weren't blaming the troops. People weren't, attacking the Defense Department even as much. It was really focused at the White House, focused at the administration there, rather than focused at the defense apparatus. And then through all of it, VA was continually forgotten. There was support for the troops, and we got to give them everything we need. And then when they come back, we actually haven't really funded VA yet and haven't talked about any of that, but I'm sure it'll work itself out, and that'll be fine. So.
And when did things change? I mean, I think I know, but from your perspective of covering that world, when did the VA all of a sudden take prominence? I mean, I think it's scandal, of course. These always start with scandal, don't they? I mean,
well, I actually think that the 2014 wait time scandal was a big deal, and that was a pivotal moment. But I actually think that the change started back in 2008, 2009 with the passage of the post 9/11 GI Bill.
There you go.
Because then all of a sudden there was a lot of money going into young veterans, and for the first time you're hearing stories about young veterans. You're actually seeing the young veterans. You're hearing instead of seeing 70-year-olds talking about way back in the day, and I could have gotten this. Now you're talking about 20-year-olds and 25-year-olds who are talking about going back to school. How are they going to integrate on campus? What does this mean? How much money are they getting? So, that all of a sudden, for the first time, I'm covering press conferences where the people who are leading the press conferences are not 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds. They are 30-somethings, they're 20-somethings who are really starting to lead the charge. And that's when I think we started to see a shift in, at least from the media perspective, just different faces and different voices out there. IAVA had started to come up. Student Veterans of America came really big on that issue. A lot of these younger veterans organizations came up, and people for the first time weren't just thinking of the old American Legion halls as crusty old places where old veterans go. Now, to their credit, the Legion, the VFW, the traditional organizations, they were also pulling in young veterans saying, this is our future. This is our face now. And we're starting to see American Legion press conferences that are organized by them and have the big apparatus, but there is a young veteran right in the forefront. And then, scandal of all scandals, there's a female veteran in the forefront. We're actually talking about women veterans for the first time in forever. We're actually talking about minority veterans. They're starting to take the forefront. We're starting to see that, hey, veterans actually aren't just this old detached group. This is the young generation. This is America, and these are stories that maybe we should all pay attention to.
Right, and it's interesting because I think the first time I noticed, obviously I did I did 04 or 03, 04. I went back 05. I was in grad school up in Massachusetts in 06, 07. And I remember when I was getting the second semester of 07 is when I heard my first Wounded Warrior Project thing. They were having a local fundraiser at one of the pubs. And when I came back from when I got back to the Pentagon after that tour or that my grad school, I heard from a group called I think it was the next year called The Mission Continues, which ended up, because they're based here in St. Louis, still around, based here in St. Louis, And so I hung out with them. I became their Washington, D.C. It's funny, when I was assigned to the Pentagon, I actually was their Washington, D.C. volunteer for The Mission Continues when it was just Eric Greitens and 3 people. And I actually helped arrange, one of the first things I did as a veterans advocate was I arranged a wreath laying ceremony, believe it or not, for them, because I was still in service. But I think that's when I started starting it from my perspective. In 08, you nailed it. I think it was 07, 08, as these young veterans started rallying around the idea of a new GI Bill, rallying around the idea we have to take care of each other, that our generation, much like these guys. And that's why I posted yesterday that the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans honored Vietnam Veterans Day, and their founders are all Vietnam veterans. And that's what I talked to these men like Ralph and others there, NCHV, it was in the mid 70s. It was after, not like 5-10 years of the war, and they saw their brothers and sisters homeless, and they said, look, we got to take care of each other. And that's when I think the first stand down in San Diego. So it's really interesting to see, and we would argue the same thing about World War II, right? World War II vets take care of it. So it's kind of interesting for me as a veteran, but I think for you as a journalist who's kind of followed that rise, they have risen. I mean, there's been an absolute flood of these nonprofits, right? Sometimes.
Well, and let's talk about National Coalition for Homeless Veterans.
I'd love to.
Which is, a lot of our relationship here and where it starts. That organization has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
But prior to 2010, 2011, I don't know if anybody knew it existed because homeless veterans were in the background. That was not an issue. President Obama, Secretary Shinseki, back in 2008, came out and said, hey, we're going to make a national commitment to getting rid of homelessness. We're going to get down the backlog. We're going to work on suicide. All of a sudden, these were issues that were not old veteran issues. These were not these were things that were affecting the younger population, but then also all, you know, the benefits benefit all populations. So all of a sudden you've got politicians really for the first time since the start of the war talking about what's happening after the war and how are we taking care of these folks who were saying, you had Bernie Sanders, you had plenty of folks who were saying this, but I don't think there was that national attention until President Obama and Secretary Shinseki really all of a sudden set down a marker. Now it was a marker that at the time I remember thinking was unrealistic and has not been achieved yet. But I do think that started to give a lot of momentum to those groups. So now all of a sudden, National Coalition for Homeless Veterans is out there advocating, and I would assume because I started covering them, everybody else just followed me. But they are getting more attention now. And
they had a really good PR guy.
people are saying to them not just what the problem is, but hey, the president is talking about this. What support are you getting from the administration? What support are you getting from Congress? And now they've started to bring that story in. So now they can bring more people in. And we have not reached that goal of 0, but we have seen the number of homeless veterans in the last decade drop by half, which is great. It's not good enough, but it's great. Like that is a goal that everyone wants here. And I guess I'm showing some of my journalistic bias here that I'm in favor of things like helping veterans and getting them into homes and things like that.
This is going to be all over the internet, I think.
This is something that we actually struggle with a little bit at Military Times. We don't want to be seen as, rah-rah, pro-war, pro-military, but we are inherently in favor of getting service members better benefits and helping them out and getting them into school, getting them into post-transition success. So
and telling their stories.
If that labels us as pro-military, I guess we'll accept that one.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, you're not exactly warmongers, that's for darn sure.
Yeah,
I think that's the thing. One of the things we talked about quite a bit, I talk about when I talk about, and this is a show about the democracy of our nation. One of the things that we started seeing, I think that those years, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, I remember specifically saying to my peers a lot that, look, veterans issues are American issues. Issues of, I think we started seeing that when the bomb started going off and we brought guys back without limbs and the technology accelerated quickly in artificial limb technology and stuff, and then mental health care, the acceleration of the understanding of TBI. Look, the term TBI, I'd never heard of TBI. Now we talk about football players with TBI, right? So much of what affects the military and what's affected us in this 20-year war, and then throw in Afghanistan before that, so I tell people while veterans are at this point, I think you probably know better than I do. I think we finally dip below 7% of the population. We're about to, I imagine, with the deaths of so many of our World War II forefathers.
You promised me there'd be no math on the fly.
Yeah, don't worry about it. I think we dip below 7%. We're right at 7%. People like to use 1%, but it's not.
But also for I think it was about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, was the tipping point where the majority of veterans in the workforce were post 9/11 veterans.
Wow.
All of a sudden, if you see a veteran out in the wild, they are more likely to be a younger veteran rather than some old Vietnam veteran that maybe you don't have that connection to or you don't understand. So there is bringing that younger face in and showing what it is. And I made a joke earlier that nobody really cared about VA in the beginning. It wasn't funded, but what I've seen over the course of my career is not that there was any malice or there's certainly some politicians who have advocated for funding, some politicians who have advocated for cutting back and push and pull and everything there. But by and large, the general public, it's just been a lack of awareness on this. I remember back in 2012, going to a viewing of a documentary over at University of Maryland. I was invited to speak to some students afterwards, and they talked about a guard unit that went over to Afghanistan and some of the struggles when they came back and all this. And there was a student right in the front row who raised her hand, and she said, I wanted to ask you about some of the frustration these guys were talking about when they came back. They're talking about trying to get their VA education benefits and not being able to understand the process and everything. And I just wanted to know, does that happen like kind of frequently? Because I can't imagine that happens all the time. I can't imagine, but I gotta, I wonder if that's like a growing problem. And I stood there for a second and I'm like, oh, you have no idea. You have no idea what the frustration is with starting up the new GI Bill, with getting care access, with some of the frustration. And I told her, you've all been to the DMV. That's a common thing that we've all been. You've all gone to get your driver's license. Imagine using that, but needing that for your college tuition and for your health care and for your home loans and some other benefits too. it's a bureaucracy, and I think VA has done a better job over the years to make itself more user friendly, but it is still a government bureaucracy. It is not going to be McDonald's where you go up and you order and you get stuff delivered right away. It's a process. It's paperwork. It's frustration. It's red tape, and it's always going to be that way. So, but the look on her face when I said that was like, oh my God, like I just thought veterans would be taken care of, because isn't that why we have a whole department for this? And yeah, it is, but this is part of the push and pull. So I think the public has become more educated over the years because of these stories. I think those GI Bill press conferences, people were saying, whoa, these guys get education benefits. What do you mean it doesn't cover most of their tuition? I thought they were going to school for free. No, not anymore. What do you mean there's a wait time scandal and you might not be able to get VA care for months and months and months, or it might get covered up? What do you mean that like these benefits, you can file stuff and it takes a year before they get any check? What is going on? So that slow public awareness has helped move things forward. That spurs political action. That spurs some of these committees that were once afterthoughts to get more in the limelight. It spurs other committees to get on this. You know, it used to be VA had the 3 or 4 hearings on VA issues every year, and most of them were just inviting the veterans groups to come in and complain and whatnot. Now, you get the small business committees to weigh in on some things. You get the armed service committees have joint hearings with the VA committees. You get this year, there's the Senate Judiciary is going to be weighing in on some stuff with the Camp Lejeune Benefits Act and some of the issues with that. So all of a sudden, everyone's looking around saying, hey, do we need to be helping out veterans too? And that's something that if you go back and talk to me in 2005, when my editors were saying we don't cover VA, I couldn't have imagined it just expanding this much.
I agree. And that's one of the things I wanted to highlight on the show is that I want to be counterintuitive to people who follow our show, and many of my followers, of course, in this program aren't the usual veterans advocates. They don't know. So it's funny. It is counterintuitive. And what's also counterintuitive, and I know we promised I wouldn't talk politics, but the unique thing about this story too is it actually isn't by party. Like I think there was a time before 2003 where a lot of us made the assumption, Dems not good for military, Republican good for military. And the funny thing is, in the many ways, these scandals that have come and gone, these growth that have come and gone, they've occurred over both parties. Both parties have made mistakes. Both parties have made progress. I was a Republican when Mr. Obama and Mrs. Obama launched joining forces. I was a huge skeptic. I had to delete tweets because they broke me. I used to joke that Mrs. Obama broke me with her muscular arms. Because you know what? They did take that shit seriously. You saw it, Leo. I mean, it was actually a serious program. I actually hired Roy Brocious, who just left officially after all these years, her second iteration of joining forces. They did good stuff. I mean, it ended up being a very powerful convening. So both parties, it seems, in a lot of ways, and we can be very partisan in this environment. Both parties have stepped up in many ways to do the right thing. Some better than others, some with different reasons, some with different arguments. But in the end, like you said, there's been a steady growth of the VA's budget. There's been a steady focus on making sure we are actually trying to take care of our veterans in some way, and we could argue that it's been interesting to see the change in the veterans community. Now, one thing I did want to touch on, because you do also study their issues, is the military itself is still is going through a lot of change, right? We're faced with we had a volunteer force when you and I started in this world. When you started, of course, I started in 1987. So you want to talk about how old we are, Leo? It's like, oh, wow, you've been doing the same thing for 20 years. Yeah, do the numbers on mine. To be clear,
I did have other jobs before this.
I'm
whatever. How far back you're pushing me here, but I have not been reporting since 1987.
No, you're right. So I've been around for since a long time, and I know I had a point with that, but now I've forgotten because I'm old. But but it's changed, right? The military personnel has changed, and we didn't start in thinking that way. The idea of a multi-year war, a 2-decade war on an all-volunteer force has forced change. How do you take an all-volunteer force? I mean, the theory was Desert Storm, right? Go in, get out. That's the only way to do an all-volunteers. Now we had an all-volunteer force that did a nearly 20-year war between Afghanistan and now Iraq. We do have troops in Iraq. Let's not forget they're still there in Syria as well. So in many ways, you've seen that arc of the change on the military itself and the military community. I tell a story often, Leo. It's funny, and I'll try to keep it short because so when I was a young PAO at the 101st Airborne, I was the Division Public Affairs Officer. I just got out of the school. I know you've dealt with young public affairs officers right out of the schoolhouse and full of all the rules, how to run a press conference, right?
Have great ideas.
So my first act is to get Donald Rumsfeld comes to Fort Campbell to visit, right? And I set up a press conference at our museum. And one of the funny things we had at the time, at the time was when they were doing the big transformation after the first iteration of OIF. We decided to expand another brigade to every division. If you remember that early in your career, add a 4th Brigade, which is like 6,000 troops, the 101st Airborne, right? I had to build barracks. I mean, huge changes. That's a rural community relatively rural community where Fort Campbell's based. It's not a freaking housing, both military nor public for that matter. And so it was a huge impact on this division. So Mr. Rumsfeld comes to visit, and I'd had all day at the press. So I was working you guys, trying to see what questions you're going to ask. I had a plan because I'm good at what I do. And you'll love the story. There was a young woman, a young girl, 8th grader. We had our own TV station at the middle school, and she was a cub reporter at the middle school TV. They had a morning news show. It was amazing. Yeah, nice. You'd love it. And so she's there, and so and her teacher's like with her. She goes, "Hey, can she ask a question?" I'm like, "I'll figure it out. Why not? Fuck, help." And so Rumsfeld comes rolling in. My 2-star tries to block me, but Rumsfeld's like, "Hey, you come brief me." Like, yeah. So I go. Rumsfeld for as many challenges was funny as hell. I'm sure you talked to him many times. And so Rumsfeld pulls me and said, "Hey, sir, here's the questions that were going on." I goes, "I love it. I goes, "Hey, sir, one question, favor to ask. We have an 8th grader here. She wants to ask a question, and here's the question." He goes, No. Don't tell me. I'm like, okay. And so the 2 funny things at that press conference, I get up there at the podium. I'm a little, I'm telling my story. Like I'm introducing the Secretary of Defense. I mean, whatever. So I'm like, here are the rules. And fucking Rummy walks up to me, Leo, and he's over my shoulder, looking over my shoulder like this. And all of you guys are giggling, right? Because I don't know that the Secretary of Defense is hovering over my shoulder, and he whispers in my ear, "They know who I am." I'm like, oh, that's a fucking good point. So he gets up. But here's the funny story, and it leads to a point. He finally calls the young lady, and she gets up, this 8th grader, and she says, "Mr. Rumsfeld is the Secretary of Defense. I'm sure you're aware the Army is going through a transformation, and this transformation is going to add 6,000 more troops here to Fort Campbell and thousands of their family members. What is your plan to ensure a smooth transition and ensure they have support?" And Rumsfeld looks at me like, "What the fuck?" I'm like, "I told you it was a good question." And goddamn, Leo, he answers that question. And you know what question made the national news that night out of all you and your peers in that room? That young woman's question ended up being run on ABC. But it brought up a good point, and is that this military family issue, here we're talking 2004, has been an issue of growing. And you report a lot on that. Do you think the military has made the improvements? I mean, how are our military families doing? I know we have challenges. There's the housing scandal with mold in the housing. Where do you think that arc has gone, and it feels like that's not gone as well as veterans, to be honest?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Look, those issues have been there, and it's always struck me. Again, I'm coming in 2004, and I'm covering these issues really for the first time. I did work up in the Philly area, covering a joint naval station near reserve base, so I had a little bit of familiarity, but nothing really serious. But I was used to covering some of those kind of parochial issues, and how you interact with community and everything. So it's not that those family issues weren't there, but they were very local. They were not national news. They were not the focus of it and everything. And I think, again, as the war drug on, all of a sudden, as the numbers start piling up, as we see that there's young families, there's young men and women who are serving, there's more attention on all of these things. So family issues, while they've always been there, the housing issues, now they start to come into focus because we start to see things like the Walter Reed scandal, where troops are coming back and they don't have that attention. Whereas before, it's not like other hospitals weren't a mess. It's just that it wasn't the national attention. It wasn't serving the younger folks who were coming back from a war that we just started. So
the flagship hospital, right? The flagship hospital in the United States.
The lens of war starts to accelerate all this. Some of the military pay issues, we saw better pay for a little while. Now it's back up, although it's more inflation and less attention. But we had things like Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which had been lingering for 15 years at that point, or when it was passed back in '93. So I'm doing the math wrong, but whatever.
I was a company commander at the time. I was a young commander.
That comes back to the forefront. So all these human issues start to drive all the other policy issues, and it's interesting when you look back. There was a real, you mentioned it before, there was the thought we're going to go into both these places, it's going to be over in no time, it's going to be like the first Gulf War was, it's just a quick hit and then we're done and out of here. As it extends on, there's a real fight in the DoD and a real fight in the larger military advocacy community of what does our stance need to be? Do we need to start shifting towards guerrilla warfare and Humvees and counterterrorism operations, or do we need to be worried about China and Russia and the bigger things, and where's our money going to be and how are we going to do this? And DoD, as it often does, after a while, just came up with the solution of why don't we just do everything? And why don't you just give us money for both? So we'll just keep piling money on, and now we'll do everything, and it'll be great. And then you've got to figure out how to balance the budget other ways, and that's your problem. But it's, it
really does sum it up quite well. Yeah, you guys figured it out.
There really was not that choice that was made at any point. But but when you see that, when you start to see these folks come home, you do start to see the personal side of this come. So the family issues, all of a sudden it's not just, well, they've got to live in housing, and I'm sure the DoD deals with this. Now it's, oh no, this person was killed overseas, and how are we taking care of their kids? How are we taking care of that spouse? Do they have housing? Wait, they're coming back and they're living in just as bad conditions as they did overseas? Like, that doesn't make sense. Why are they struggling to get their education benefits once they get out? Where do they integrate? So we've learned it's never a quick thing, and ideally the money and the resources and the support systems would be there when we start it, but I think there has been just more of a focus, more of an appreciation. I hope that there's just more of an awareness among the entire American public that service members are people too. I mean, let's be honest, like you and I have talked for years, and I've written for a long time about the gap between the military community and the civilian community. I had no real connections and no real conversations till I started covering this. And yet there are veterans in every community. It might be the old guy who lives down the street. It might be the young couple who lives here. It might be the mom who's dropping her kids off at school with you. But multiple veterans. You just didn't think about it before, and now the country, as we deal with that, as you learn about these people, you think, hey, why is Megan dealing with crap over at the VA? Shouldn't she be getting better stuff? Maybe I should complain to somebody. I mean, I'm sure she's complaining, but maybe I should be complaining too. So And in fairness, Megan actually got her knee replaced and she's doing fine. So,
well, I am proud of my fellow Americans. I mean, it sounds fun. Again, it's counterintuitive. I think when we were talking before the show, I mentioned that I participated in the invasion 20 years ago, and one of my followers said, we just, our veterans should get everything. We still don't treat our veterans right. I said, I don't know. I'm not the. Actually, we're treated pretty well. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be counter too. I mean, there's always more, but I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. We've got a pretty good setup. I'm a veteran. My son is a veteran. My son-in-law still serves in the National Guard. They've been well taken care of in many ways.
So this has been one of the real change. Yeah, this has been one of the real struggles on my end. Is as a reporter, as a journalist who's covering the VA, it is my job to point out the flaws and to try and get them corrected. Yeah. I don't, as I tell people all the time, I don't cover olds. If things are going well, I don't usually report on it. We cover news. Now, that is a struggle with the veterans community, because I do not want to be portraying veterans and service members as constantly broken individuals who deal with this. And it's something that stories about exactly. And that's something that the veterans community is very sensitive about, and has been an obstacle for getting veterans to talk about veterans and veterans issues, especially things like PTSD and TBI, where they don't want to be seen as, yes, I'm broken and you can't deal with me. So PTSD, major issue, one that DoD is still trying to work on, one that VA is still trying to work on. I talked to a family member a couple of years ago, and they asked what I was covering. I started to say that, and they said, oh, it's terrible how all of these service members come back and they all have to deal with PTSD. And I say, hold on, time out. Not all of them do. Some of them do. It is a small percentage of them, but we got to take care of the ones who do. Right. And that goes across the board. There are some folks who really struggle with integration. There are some folks that end up homeless. There are some folks that it is the country's responsibility. It is the country's responsibility to take care of that, and that's the unique thing. There, when we get to a perfect society, everybody's going to be taking care of everybody, but veterans and service members are in a unique position where they have made sacrifices on behalf of the country, and the country owes them for those sacrifices. So we have set up these support systems to take care of them. By the same token, lots and lots of veterans don't need those support services. Lots of veterans come out, they get a good job, they own their own podcast. They're doing.
I'm not sure if that's an improvement. Is it a cry for help, Leo?
But the point is, I can't always be writing about how things are going well. I try to find ways to do this. I try to find ways to highlight this, but it is something I'm always conscious of. I don't want the American public to think veterans are this weird subclass that has all of these problem. Veterans are your neighbors. Veterans know these things. But when your neighbor complains that they can't get their GI Bill stuff settled and it's going to end up causing the problems, you should complain like hell to your your member of Congress to say, why isn't this system working better? Why are we helping these folks? Didn't we make a promise to them? Then fulfill that promise. Also, fill the pothole out front. Get those two things taken care of, and that's what I want. So,
and I'll vote for you.
I think that's the main thing that I think we're getting closer to there. I think when I first started writing, I wrote a lot of stories about how veterans were not these scary war-torn people who were coming to your neighborhood and who knows what they're going to do. I think we've gotten past that. People have seen sons and daughters come home. They've seen friends. They've seen their kids' college classmates come home, and and they're like, all right, like, yeah, he had this issue and that issue, but like, that's cool. Now he's working in finance. Now he's got this boring accounting job. He's doing fine. This is all good. So I hope that we continue to see that, and I hope what that is it puts VA on par with the other agencies where we say, hey, this is something where, yes, this serves a specific group, Housing and Human Services. That serves a specific group, but also I expect you to serve that group. I expect you to do this. I expect you to VA. I expect you to serve this. So as opposed to VA, DOD, I never served, so none of that's my problem.
Right. And I really appreciate that. And I think that the best highlight of that is you do a great job. I still follow your stuff on Twitter, and it's still is the veteran unemployment number, right? Which continues to hover.
I have some other people you can follow who have better stories than me. I can get you.
I'm a super fan, but it is the veteran unemployment is a perfect example, right? It has, other than we had a real disaster of those few years, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And then we saw a flip, right? We saw that number start to flip and then just drop dramatically, where I think it just generally hovers half the actual, in general, half or a point.
Not quite
below.
half, but it's lower.
It's lower, like at least a point.
It's consistently lower.
Consistently lower.
Look, it has been 7 or 8 solid years since I've had to write a story about how service members need to translate their resumes for a civilian audience. That was a staple in the
God, I know,
like,
agony, man.
But it was necessary then, because there were a lot of people saying, I don't understand this. I'm like, what don't you understand? This person did Army logistics. They can work for UPS now. Like it's the same process. Just send them up with a new computer program and send them on their way. They'll fine.
Figure it out. So we tend to figure shit out.
We're not seeing that now. We're not seeing the convincing college campuses that veterans will be okay on campus. We're not seeing the show companies that these are highly motivated, highly attractive job candidates that they want to get. So I do feel like we're past some of those things. Now the next step is, do we really understand when we say, what does it mean to reduce veteran suicide? What does it mean to continue to reduce veterans homelessness? What is that going to require, and what kind of commitment is that going to take, not just from the veterans and the DOD and the military community, but from the public at large? Because these are problems where those corners have solved probably as much as they can. And now at this point, we need innovation from civilian medical things. We need community partnerships that have nothing to do with veterans, but are going to be able to produce more beds so that homeless veterans can get into them. And we need just people to hang out at barbecues with their veterans and talk about, what was that like? Oh, that's interesting.
Yep.
My kid was kind of interested in it, but I told him it's just shooting stuff. Well, it's not totally true. Let's have a conversation. If they want to do it, fine. If they don't, fine. But they at least understand what the future is for this.
And I love that. And I think you're right. I think, and again, as we circle back, and I'll probably let you go, is these are the issues you just highlighted are the most intransient, the most difficult ones to solve, are not just veterans issues. And I say this a lot, and I want people to understand that as Americans, that veterans aren't the only people in America with PTSD. I think there's estimates that we're 8% of that, right? Veterans aren't the only people with TBI. Veterans aren't the only people who are homeless. Veterans aren't the only people who deal with these issues of transition from one career to another. And in many ways, by working with the veteran community and the focus we've done as a nation, which has been actually good in many ways, we're actually reducing it nationally. We're reducing homelessness. The solutions for veterans aren't really that different than solutions for average Americans, right?
You know how to fix the veteran suicide problem? It's get more mental health specialists across the country and figure out better ways to treat mental health.
Because we have an American mental health crisis. We have
that's going to help veterans. That's going to help a lot of other people too. So, this is where a lot of it intersects. And maybe VA is the crowbar we need to open up the lid of that problem and really get in there and fix it. But also, we do have a special responsibility to veterans. So fine. we can start with them and reap the benefits down the road. We can start with getting the veteran suicide down to 0 and then figure out how it benefits everyone else. We can get veterans homelessness down and use those lessons to fix other things. So
I love it. And I think that's great. And I'm proud of me, of my fellow veterans. I'm proud of the amazing Americans and government bureaucrats. I hate the term, but they have stepped up in many ways. You know, it's funny how I had the funniest story, and I'll let you go. A few years ago, I was still living in Fredericksburg, if you remember. And one of my peers there in Fredericksburg is a veteran, Iraq veteran. We become good friends. And I'm classic. We have different politics. I'll leave it at that. And he messaged me one day, Leo. He goes, "Man, I just got back from the Richmond VA and he really took good care of me. I feel uncomfortable." like, you know, man, I mean, it was like VIP. I mean, everything I asked for, I got. I'm like, he goes, you know, he was like, he had convinced himself the VA was going to be a nightmare, and he had this incredible treatment. He had a doctor who took care of him. If you read Jason Kander's book, which I believe is right here, you know, Jason Kander's book is amongst these about his experience at the VA. Here's the guy who was running for president, then ran for mayor of Kansas City, dropped out because his PTSD got the better of him. Finally, he went to the VA there in Kansas City, and they turned his life around. If I recommend any book you read, Jason Kander's book is his new and Invisible Storm is a great one about that arc of those of us who serve and why he went to the VA.
I wonder if individuals like John Fetterman, Senator Fetterman, could publicly talk about some of their mental health struggles, if not for all the veterans and all the military members we've seen over the last 15 years publicly talking about their struggles, trying to normalize it. Mm-hmm. When you see big, tough Army men talking about, you know, their struggles with adjustment and their struggles with PTSD, it makes it easier for everybody else to talk about it too. So
I've been very open. I've been very open about it. And it's always been gratifying to me when I talk about my journey, because I only started my journey really getting healing about 5 years ago when everything went to shit and I had to, you know, and the journey I went through, it's always gratifying to me. I'll reach out, and it is what you just said. I'll have a lot of guys that look like me who are retired colonels, a lot of them retired lieutenant colonels like me. It's amazing to me how many 40, 50-year-old guys reach out and say, "Dude, I think I should get help too." Like, yeah, you know, it's like but also civilians who say to me like, "Oh man, I really appreciate, you know, the fact that, you know, you're Mr. Ranger and 4-time combat veteran and, you know, all that stuff. And you're saying, look, this was hard for me and nobody got blown up in my watch. I lost people, including civilians. My first wife was killed in a car accident. I was in a meeting for the military, but it wasn't a military thing. This is human stuff. And, and so, you know, then I lost men in combat. Now we know that, you know, one of the changes is that survivor's guilt is a form of PTSD, which I don't think we knew. I mean, we didn't call it survivor's guilt when I first, you know, had it. And so those are all good for America and good for everyone. And you're right. If we can, that's what I love about that concept and what you just said, and I'll close with that, I'll let you go, is that we as veterans owe it to the nation as well, right? That we can continue to lead in ways that are different, which is like, and you nailed it so perfectly, a big tough veteran or a soft one like me, you know, who can say, yeah, I had problems. It made my life very hard. You could argue I lost my family in many ways, and other things, you know, probably part of my business lost but I dealt with it my way, and here I am on the other side of it, and there's light on the other side, and we can continue to lead our nation in being honest about our struggles and everything else. Well, Leo, man, thanks for taking time.
One last thing before you close on me.
Go ahead.
Is the only reason I'm able to tell any of these stories, and the only reason I'm able to do any of it, is because the veterans community has been so open and so welcoming to me. And as a kid who came in with no knowledge of any military stuff and complete idiot, I've had so many veterans folks just hold my hand, walk me through complicated issues, walk me through this stuff. So I know it's tough, but I also, my experience has been the veterans community likes to tell its story and wants to tell its story because it helps tell the story of America. So I've been lucky enough to play a small part in that. And I hope that, you know, when we do the 40th year anniversary podcast of the Iraq War, you and I can talk about this. And I'm still writing these same stories because veterans still trust me enough to share those. So, and with that, I got to go run to a hearing for the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee.
Get on it, man.
They're dealing with some other stuff. So we got to go keep them in check.
Man, I appreciate you. And again, our community needs you, and you've gotten awards from my peers in the veterans community for a reason, because you did take our story seriously. You've always bent over backwards. Personally, for Fred Wellman, I always appreciated the way you did. If I called you, you had an answer, and you point me to the person who could get an answer to, and that means a lot to me. So, Leo, keep up the fight. Thanks for everything. Thanks for joining me today, man.
I appreciate it. Great talk. Let's do it again soon.
I can't wait. Thanks, brother. Oh man, what a great conversation. I know it's a little different for the show, but these are issues that matter. We talk about our democracy, talk about our nation. I couldn't have thought of a better person to join us. And you see what I deal with. You know, Leo Shane is truly a great American, and his passion for the community of our veterans and his telling their story is unmatched. He had to rush off to a hearing, so he didn't get it out, but you can find him on Twitter at Leo Shane. He's there all the time. We'll tag him on our Twitter. Of course, our Twitter is On Democracy Pod. I'm FP Wellman. Before I let you go, I do want to reflect for just a moment on my experience. I remember about this time when this show comes out, I was on probably our second stop in Iraq. I was with the 101st Airborne Division at the time. I was qualifying that Black Hawk helicopter as my second helicopter. I had invaded Iraq essentially in 1991 with the 24th Infantry Division, the big left hook of Desert Storm. I was in that same world in 2003 with the 101st Airborne Division, where I served as an operations officer for a Black Hawk battalion. That means that I kind of ran, gave the orders, sent people, made the planning for missions. And we had a unique mission. The 6th and 101st Aviation was kind of the general support battalion, we called it. So we were actually assigned to where the Apaches were assigned. And we supported them with, if they got shot down, I actually led the task force to go pick them up. We also had the general officer's aircraft, General Petraeus' helicopter, and a couple other generals, and all the weird missions. We also had a Pathfinder infantry platoon, famed 101st Airborne Pathfinders. If you remember World War II, the guys that had the Mohawks in the World War II pictures, those the 101st Airborne's Pathfinders. That platoon of infantrymen belonged to our aviation unit, who were wonderful to me because I was qualified as an Army Ranger. I went to Ranger school, and they appreciated having at least one Black Hawk guy in the unit who had a Ranger tab and understood what it meant to walk. And so it was a unique unit, and I went into that war obsessed with not losing any men or women. I had lost 2 of my men in Desert Storm. I had left a mark for many years, still does. And I went into OIF I'm going to do whatever it is. I joke, I was kind of a dick, to be honest with you, because I was like, look, wear your freaking helmets, dig your holes. Every time we land a helicopter, dig a hole next to it in case we get shot at. But the thing is, it's a unique experience. The Iraq War is such a unique war in the sense of so many people question why we went there. So many people reasonably question the justification for the invasion. So many people reasonably question, did we do the right thing, and did we actually leave a mess? And I was in an interview that I think is publishing in Europe this weekend about the anniversary, and the reporter asked me, was it worth it? And I'm not necessarily sure you could ask an Iraq veteran a harder question. Was it worth it? Especially with me, since most of my tours after that first one, actually including the first one, were focused on directly helping the Iraqi people. During the first tour, I ended up being the civil affairs officer in addition to my other jobs. And I actually built schools, I built clinics, I worked with the local population. I had an interpreter from Mosul, Bassam, who, if you follow me on my newsletter, you've seen his name. Dr. Muhammad is our local sheikh. I built, we delivered water. I worked with the local Iraqis. And then my second 2 tours, I actually worked directly with the Iraqi military, even directly for the Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister to help them build their military. So I have a great affection for the Iraqi people. And so it's a unique situation where you went in 2003 to destroy them, destroy their army, and liberate their people. And it's weird. By the time we got to Mosul, we were actually seen as liberators that first point. I have the funny story. It's a true story of a young man running up to my Humvee to give me wildflowers as we dropped down into Mosul, as we came in the back way into Mosul. But that changed eventually, right? And so there is I think a lot of us struggle with what was right and wrong. In the end, I took the approach that I would try to do the right thing within my purview, that I could do the right thing for my soldiers and my fellow service members. I would do the absolute right thing for the Iraqis that I was there ostensibly to serve. If that meant getting them water, or if that meant training them to be able to fight on their own, that's what I did. I wanted to leave Iraq each time I left, having at least made my little circle of control better. On that note, I recently announced that a wonderful book agent has agreed to help me publish my memoir, and I posted that on Facebook. And many of my Facebook friends, my personal Facebook, are actually Iraqis who I met in Iraq in that first tour. And I got a Facebook call from an Iraqi, and mind you, it's written in Arabic, and I don't speak Arabic. And it turned out to be one of Dr. Muhammad's sons, who was just a 10-year-old when we invaded the country, and I met him the first time. And he didn't speak English. So we're on FaceTime on Facebook, looking at each other, and he's speaking Arabic, and I'm like, okay. And he wanted to show me his kids, his babies. He had a baby, and a toddler, and probably a 10-year-old. And he wanted me to see them. And he cried. And he called me Major Wellman because I never got promoted from that fur tour as far as my Iraqis go. I still think I'm a major. And he just wanted to tell Major Wellman that he was okay, and that they had survived, and that they were thriving, that they had children, and that they appreciated me and the work I did. And it couldn't come at a better time as the 20th anniversary approached. And so many of us who served wonder if we did the right thing. I don't know if I did. I'll let history judge that. I tried, and my soldiers all came home, and I think I helped some people. And when the son of a man who served with you, an Iraqi who ended up being murdered in the clinic I built for him in 2011, when his son reaches out to you to let you know that he's got grandkids, Dr. Muhammad has grandkids, and he wants you to see them, I guess you can take solace that you tried, that maybe you did do the right thing for some people. So as you meet your friends who are Iraq veterans, keep that in mind. We all served in our own way. I used to say when I was a veterans advocate that when you've met one veteran, you've met one veteran. And experiences may vary. My experience was unique. And I hope to tell this story. I'm excited. We'll be building a Substack community. I've joined Substack. I lost my newsletter that I had on review thanks to Mr. Musk. But I'm going to start a Substack and tell some of these stories and tell others. And I hope you'll join that community when I get it up and running. I'll announce it shortly. But in the meantime, I think if you talk to some of your peers and your friends or your neighbors who have been Iraq veterans, just don't feel sympathy or anything like that. Just ask them their stories. I think you'll find the stories fascinating. There's something about being a part of history like we are that is unique. So with that somber note, thank you for joining this show. Thank you for joining On Democracy and your loyalty to this program. I look forward to growing our community together. I hope you'll tell your friends about the podcast. I hope you'll like and subscribe. I hope you'll write a good review, 5-star review. I could use a few more. And as always, do your best for your community and for your fellow Americans, and keep up the fight. And this is all worth it. With that, I'll see you next week.